All right, why don't we give it one more minute? If you're just joining, we're sharing where everybody is from. If you want to just type in the Q&A window.
Cami, do you know what font? Do you know what font is used on that screen? Lincoln guy wants to know.
It is Chalk Duster. You like that font? It's I'm on a Mac, so I don't know if that's a PC font or a Mac font. I was hoping it didn't look too much like Comic Sans. So. Are you hearing the birds?
Not on my end.
Gorgeous. Oh, that's good. Okay. They're very loud. It's a gorgeous day in Massachusetts. Excellent. Well, I think we're going to get started now. I just wanted to welcome everyone today to the Kineo Thursday webinar series. We've been doing a series of these this fall. And today's topic is on interactivity and e-learning. On the call today, this is the talk radio show for Cami Bean and Steve Wan. I'm Cami Bean. I'm the Vice President of Learning Design for Kineo US. And joining me today as my producer is Steve Wan out of our Chicago office. Steve, say hello.
Hello, everyone.
Steve is an interactive designer with us here at Kineo. And I have been doing e-learning for 16 plus years. Done a lot of it in my time. Kineo is a global organization. We work with clients all over the world and have done hundreds and hundreds of e-learning projects. I'm going to show you a lot of them today. If you are interested in a Twitter back channel, let's use the Kineo webinar hashtag today just to keep things consolidated and share. And otherwise, you can put questions into the Q&A pod in GoToWebinar. Fortunately, we don't have a full chat window for everyone to share. So if you want to talk to each other, I go onto Twitter during the session. That's encouraged and welcome. We're going to do a poll first, just to find out who is on the call. Steve, take it away with a poll. And we are going to ask how long you have been designing or developing e-learning. Some of you are probably brand new. Some of you have been doing it for a while. And I kind of made up that category. I'm a grizzled veteran, 5+ years. But I figured, you know, that's about where we start really settling into e-learning and knowing more what you're doing. Okay, so I think you have to close the poll if everyone's responded, Steve, and then we can see the results. And not seeing the results. So can you share with us what the results were, Steve? Steve? I think we have lost Steve.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
All right.
Now we can hear you. Yeah. Can you tell us what the results were?
Sure.
Who do we have here? Because I'm not seeing them.
So 44% have 1 to 5 years experience, and that's the biggest group. And we have 21% that are brand new to e-learning, 21% that have 5 or more years of experience, and 14% that have less than a year. Okay, great. So presumably you're all looking for some ideas and inspiration today, and I hopefully we'll be able to provide plenty of that. With that in mind, what is your role within the creation of e-learning? We've got another poll here. So are you an instructional designer? Are you a developer where you're actually building courses? It's possible that you are all of the above, and I probably should have included that as an option because so many of us do wear many hats. If that's the case, maybe just write into chat that you do all of the above, but give us what your primary role is or what's your main skill, what's your sweet spot in terms of e-learning design and development. I call myself first and foremost an instructional designer. I have the benefit, however, I've worked at e-learning companies on the vendor side for pretty much my entire e-learning career. So I have specialists. I have people who are doing the building, who know how to use the tools, who can do graphic design.
And that's really the plus side for those of us who work on the vendor side of things. For those of you who are doing everything, kudos to you. It's a lot of different jobs in there. But Steve, what are the results for this poll?
So we have 41% that are IDs, and 30% as developers, 26% as other, and we have a whole load of people in the chat saying that they do all of the above.
Well, I have a word for that, which is called superhero. And I do think it's a lot, if you are doing all of the above in an e-learning capacity, it's a lot of different skill sets, and it's hard to get them all right. So kudos to you, and I'm glad you're here for some support and inspiration, and hopefully the community can help you really get all of those skills refined and fine-tuned as you go forward. Okay, so a little bit later, I'm going to be showing a lot of examples, but if anyone is brave and wants to share your own examples of e-learning, of something that you think is interactive and really cool, we would love to see you strut your stuff. If you're shy and want to send us screenshots, or if you just want to share ideas in the Q&A, that's fine too. But let us know if you'd like to share anything later on, and just give Steve a shout in Q&A and let him know, and we can turn that over to you later on. So let's talk about interactivity and what it is. In the chat or on a piece of paper, write down, what does interactive e-learning mean to you? I'd love to hear your responses in the Q&A pod. Steve's going to share them to us so we can kind of get a sense of where people are starting from. What does interactive e-learning mean? And it's very fair to say I have no idea. That's why I came to this webinar. So Steve, anything coming through?
So David Peeble says, involving the student beyond watching. Becky Massey says it's when the learner gets to make choices. Matt Gritton says learner engagement. Got a whole load of opinions here. Barb says shakes things up.
Shake things up, okay.
Sarah says actively engaging people in their learning. A lot of engagements.
Okay. I think engagement is a nice little buzzword, and I think a lot of people don't always know what it means. I think it gets overused, but I think it's a good word. I think that is what we're trying to do with interactive e-learning. It's more than having them click a next button, and even clicking a flashing next button. Did you see that? I'm going to do it again because it's so exciting. It's flashing, it's pulsing. Sometimes stakeholders might think that, oh, if you have next buttons, it's interactive e-learning. I heard you say choices, giving people choices. I think that's really important. Shaking things up can be a good thing for sure. So let's talk about it a little bit closer, more defined. Interactivity. So take those two words, inter and act, right? So it's two things that work together. We say that drugs interact with each other. You've always got to watch, what drugs are you taking? Are they interacting with each other in a positive or a negative way? Muscles on the body and bones, they interact together to move things. So there's some input and output happening where things are happening. That is interaction. When we talk about human to device or human to artifact interaction, we're really thinking about that input-output mode. So this is a picture of my son touching one of those, I don't know what those are called, but you touch it and the electricity moves all over the place. That's really interactive, right? Something is happening. You're shaking things up a little bit, to use, I think it was Barbara's word there. A telephone is interactive. It is, you're dialing, something's happening. So there's an input and there's an output. There's an expected behavior for that device that you're using. And I think as we think about technology, it's interesting because the affordances of technology are changing so rapidly. So we've got touch screens and phones and tablets where you're swiping, and the way you interact with these devices is changing a lot too. Software is inherently interactive, so word processing systems, PowerPoint is interactive. That's me. I took a screenshot of this slide as I was developing it, but you're putting stuff in and stuff is coming out. The third category of interaction is really human-to-human communication, and I think this is lost in a lot of e-learning. So how can we make our e-learning more interactive in that human way? And I have a mantra. I say e-learning, it's all about the people, man. You've got to remember that there are human beings on the other end of the line. So how can we add in that human element to our e-learning to make it truly interactive in that sense of, here's this couple having
a lovely glass of wine, or they're talking, or collaboration. These people are working together. That is, in a workspace, that's truly interactive. So how can we add that element into our e-learning? I think this is giving you maybe some different definitions, ways to think about it. So to somebody's point earlier about choices, interactivity does live on a spectrum from, a passive learner control to greater user freedom. So somebody had made a comment, I think it was David, about passive, is one end of things. So you can watch TV, and that's a very passive activity with not a lot of learner control, viewer control, although that is changing. We have remote controls. We have on-demand TV. We can pause and play. So increasingly, even TV has a lot of interactive components to it. Add on to that all of the social tools that people are using, where you're watching TV and you're actually tweeting about it at the same time, or you're on Facebook and you're talking to your friends about the show that you're watching. We've added a whole layer of interactivity to even passive actions like TV watching. In the middle of the spectrum, you might find something like a search field. So Google is, interactive inputs and outputs. Multiple choice questions, I would say, are interactive, and certainly you can write them in a way to make them a little bit more, have more of that human element to them. And then finally, kind of on that full spectrum of technology-based tools and experiences, you have an open world, really immersive, open learning, or not learning environment. This is a game, actually, a simulation where you get to go where you want. You can explore at free will. So you have a lot of choices in something like that. So your e-learning might live on that spectrum. So why does e-learning need to be interactive, and does it? And why don't you just throw some thoughts down into the Q&A and let us know what you think. Why do you think e-learning needs to be interactive? Rachel said that it's about getting learners to connect to the material. I think that's a really good one. It's adding a component where you're thinking about it more, so that ultimately you're going to be encoding that knowledge a little bit better. It improves retention. People learn by doing. Shannon said on Twitter that interactive e-learning engages the mind, not just the mouse. I love that. So it's not just about clicking the next button. It's getting you thinking. It improves understanding. So I'm not checking email or Facebook instead of learning, somebody wrote. So I hope that that's true right now. You're so engaged in this webinar that you're not checking email, or you're actually sitting and paying attention here. It keeps the attention of the learner, and it makes it as real life as possible. These are great ideas. Keep them coming, and we'll try to pull them through. Now, sometimes we think that we have to do interactive e-learning because our stakeholders ask for it. I think it's a buzzword, and I think a lot of stakeholders don't always understand what interactive e-learning means. I was asking this on Twitter yesterday, and somebody said, one of the big problems is a lot of stakeholders think that animation is interactive. And it's, that's not how we would define interactivity. There's no input or output there. It's passive. It can be. It depends on how you write it. So some people want interaction because they think it's more fun, because they think it's more engaging, because it helps us learn better. There's a lot of that, but there's also some dangers to it. And I call it clicky, clicky, bling, bling. So beware the dangers of clicky, clicky, bling, bling. And that's a lot of gratuitous interactivity that doesn't actually promote deeper understanding, doesn't promote more reflection, it doesn't promote retention. It's just kind of fancy, flashy flash stuff for the sake of fancy flash stuff. And if you look at some of the research on this, Ruth Clark, if you're all familiar with e-learning and the science of instruction by Ruth Clark, she does a lot of research into studies. She does a lot of research on e-learning, working closely with Mayer. She talks about seductive details, and that's adding this gratuitous, flashy stuff that really does distract the learner. And I think we have to be careful when we're adding interactivity to our program so that we're not doing too much that's just seductive and not adding to the experience. So I might say something like these Jeopardy games or spin the wheel games. They're interactive, but there's not a lot of context to it. And ultimately, I think that creates for meaningless interactivity. If you're trying to do some drill and kill and get people to memorize facts and get them to essentially just memorize, then maybe a game like this has some value. but there's no context to it because I do not play Jeopardy in my real life and I don't spin the wheel in my real life. So I think we have to make sure that we're providing interactivity that has some context to it. So avoid interactivity for interactivity's sake. It can lead to learner fatigue. You know, it's like you're just clicking and clicking and clicking. I've seen hot graphic screens where you have 25 things on the screen that you have to click on to explore everything on the screen. And that's just too much. That's fatiguing to the learner. It can be distracting. You have too much flashy flash going on. And it doesn't promote deeper understanding if it's not connected to that context. So Ellen wanted to know what the name of that book was that I mentioned. It's called eLearning and the Science of Instruction, and it's by Ruth Clark. And it is really one of the classics right now in the field. It's by Ruth Clark and Richard Mayer, and I think she's up to the 3rd edition right now. I definitely would recommend that book, eLearning and the Science of Instruction. Steve, maybe you can put a link to that in the chat for everybody. She's also got a book called Evidence-Based Training Methods, a guide for training professionals. That's got a lot of very hands-on practical stuff. And what I like about her books is it points to research that you can then go back and take to stakeholders. And you can say, hey, this is why this isn't a good idea. This is why this doesn't work. Here's what the research shows. And that can be a really effective way to educate your audience that you're working with. All right, anything coming up into chat or Q&A, Steve, that I should respond to? I'm going to take a little breath right now. I get very excited about this stuff, and I start talking too fast.
If you had a conversation going on Twitter, if you want to take a look, Amy.
Okay. Oh,
Andy
excellent.
and Adam like click, are like in a clicky bling bling.
There is an article I wrote on the Kineo website and for eLearning magazine on clicky bling bling, avoiding the trap thereof. So check it out. We can post a link to that later. Yeah, great. Good ideas coming on Twitter. And I can only multitask so much, so I'm not going to spend too much time looking over there. So Steve will continue to pull out the good stuff for me. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces, I know.
Cami, could you repeat those 2 books?
Which books? I said eLearning and the Science of Instruction, and then the other one was Evidence-Based Training Methods.
And they're both by Ruth Clark?
That's also by Ruth Clark, yep. And I could take a picture for you of my stack of books. I read a lot of books about e-learning. I read them in my spare time because that's the kind of geek I am. If you are new to the field, I would suggest doing that as well. There's a lot of good stuff out there. And I've got book lists on my blog we can point you to. So we've got another poll here, and just wanted to get a sense from people as what you see as the chief barrier to including more interactivity in your e-learning programs. So is it that it's money? Is it time? We're just not creative enough? I don't have the right people. It's too technical, so I don't have the right people to build it. What are your barriers? And we'll leave the poll open for another minute or so.
We've got some people in chat saying all the above.
I keep not giving you guys that option, don't I? All of the above. Well, what's the chief barrier? What's the number one thing? Ooh, somebody says stakeholders. So your stakeholders they don't want it to be interactive. They just want a PowerPoint. Probably because they think all those other things. Okay, so we're not creative. It takes too much time. That was the top reason. Interesting.
We also have some people saying lack of understanding of how to build interactive learning.
Okay, so I don't know how to do it. I guess that would be, I don't know how to do good interactivity. All right, well, we're going to look at some examples today that I think will bring it all into the realm of possibility and hopefully help you rethink things a little bit. So Steve, you can close that poll. Yeah, upper management wants it now and without time. So that's the question of if it's rapid e-learning, how much can you do if you have to get it out tomorrow?
And maybe not, but maybe I think there are some things that you can add into that experience. So, all right, so what can interactivity look like? The kind that we can build without blowing our budget. And I'm not talking about building an immersive 3D simulation or a world. So what do you think are the hallmarks of really effective interactivity? We've shared some of them already. We've talked about engagement. We've talked about choices. Maybe describe in Q&A an exercise that you thought was really good, that was interactive and effective. And again, I'm thinking about the kind of interactivity that you can build without blowing your budget. Debbie says scenario-based choices. I think that's great. You can do a lot with multiple choice questions that are actually quite interactive. The learner sees the consequences of choices they are making. That's great, Thomas. Yeah. So in a branching scenario or something like that where you get to go down a path and see what happens. It needs to be relative. It's work-based. So, Chris, I think that's you again, Chris, saying it needs to be work-based. I think that's about it being relative and contextual. You got to know your audience at all times and provide a lot of opportunity for practice, right? So to all of that, I would say when you're designing interactivity and you're thinking about how to make something more interactive, let's not forget the brain, right? It's all about making people think, make them cogitate. You want people to reflect hard, think about how to apply this stuff. You can do a lot that is really interactive, that really gets people thinking without having them click a thing. You know, think about a really good book on something that you're trying to learn. It can be incredibly interactive, and I'm not clicking anything. I am thinking hard and long about it. So let's expand our notion of what interactivity is, and we're gonna look at some examples. Okay. So, and I've kind of broken this down into 3 buckets of interactivity, and the first one is about reflecting. So how can we get learners to reflect on the content, reflect on their own situations? And this kind of reflection can look passive, but a lot is happening inside their brains. And that's where I think that people forget about this as an option in online e-learning, because I think it has to be all about dragging and dropping and clicking and so on. So I'm going to switch over to some real live examples. I'm hoping we can see that. Okay, good. All right, so this is a program that has no audio to it. I am clicking an X button. But if you are following along with the content here, it's getting you feeling a little bit uncomfortable. We've just taken a snapshot of you. If someone took a snapshot of you at this very moment, what thoughts, feelings, and actions might have you created? So I'm thinking right now, I'm inside my head, I'm going, oh gosh, what am I doing? How would people, if they looked at me, what would they be thinking about me? This is a program all about communication. What thoughts, feelings, and actions do you need to create to be successful in your job? So just through questions, we have created that reflective moment where we're getting them thinking in a different way about this content. So nothing truly interactive in the sense of clicky there, right? But it's in the brain. All right, another example of ways that we can add reflection into an e-learning experience. And I'm just going to show static screenshots of this right now. But what we did, this is a program on building empathy and tone. It was a training on empathy and tone for people in a call center. Now, in the real world, what we would have liked to have had them be able to do is record, listen to real live calls, do in-the-moment reflection, listen to their own call, self-assess, all that kind of thing. But the technology and just the constraints, because this was a financial institution with their calls, they couldn't record them, so they had a lot of control. So we created these scenarios where they listen to a call. So you're going to listen to this agent talking to Marvin, the guy on the left, and then you're going to rate that agent, how well he did. And the idea behind this exercise is that if you can start
assessing what you're hearing in other people, you're going to be able to you're going to be able to internalize that yourself and bring that into your own practice. So they rate the agent on a slider bar, and that little slider bar moves back and forth there, and you can give them a 5, you can give them a 10. There's no right or wrong answer. Then we have them go through and say, well, this is what I heard in that call. So we're helping them identify what those good skills sound like. Now, this then concluded where you heard the manager, and I'm using air quotes right there. The manager says, here's what I heard in that call. Is that what you heard? So you're helping them practice those listening skills in a, it's interactive. It's making them think. It's forcing them to think about this content in a different way. And after we go through that once, we're going to ask them about their own performance. What areas do you need to work on? What do you think of your own performance? And ideally, we would have liked to have recorded their own calls and have them listen to them and then rate them. We couldn't do that because of limitations with their call center. But we did build in lots of opportunity for reflection in this program. So how do you rate yourself on these 3 skills? And they're just going to go through it. The feedback says, great, we all have room for improvement, but it's really to get them to reflect on their own skills and experience. Now they're scoring themselves. How do you score? Use that slider bar to rate yourself. And now let's set some goals for yourself. So getting them to think about the areas that they need to work on, where they need to improve. This program, by the way, I think we saw after they implemented this, there was a 4-fold increase in their quality ratings. So a big improvement. It actually made a difference. It got them to listen differently, and to then, when they went on the phones, to actually do their calls a little bit differently. Another thing you can do is just ask them how confident. This is a very similar experience, exercise. So this was for a football association. This was out of the UK. And for soccer coaches, for youth soccer. So what they did was they were going to set them up for a confidence assessment. And they watch a short video that talks about the ethos. You can read that right there. And then they just have them self-assess, so using slider bars again. I am confident that I understand my role and responsibilities in spreading my club's ethos among children and parents. Now, this kind of self-reflection exercise is really good at the beginning of a course because it focuses your attention. It helps you realize where you need to, as a learner, okay, well, I need to be thinking about what my role and responsibilities are going to be as I go forward. That focuses your attention and creates for a bit more focus of a learning experience, so they start to know where they need to be paying attention as they go through the course. So it's giving you that attention, it's getting their attention, it's engaging them, it's helping them reflect on their own skills and experience. Any questions coming through? All right, great. Let us know if you have any questions. So here's another example that you can do. I'm going to go to a real live thing. This is a program for kids with impairments and disabilities. And it's a very reflective, overall it's a very reflective e-learning experience. So we've got these 2 characters in the program, and they're talking about their own experiences and sharing their own issues. And we set them up with this little story, and now here we just have an open text input screen. And I believe you can do this in Articulate. This is a flash course, but this is your chance to reflect. It's for your eyes only, and it won't be saved. If you don't want to type anything, then have a think instead. So we know that people may not type anything. And, they might type something. I'm going to type, I feel uncomfortable. People always look at me. So whether or not you actually have them doing something and typing something, or you have a screen that just gets them to stop and think, they serve the same purpose. Here we've got a submit button, and you get a little bit of feedback. So trying to have that conversation. It's really about making this more human, adding that human element to it. All right, so that's Whiz Kids. So have you been providing any opportunities for reflection in your e-learning? If anyone has anything to share, just jot that down into chat. Adam is asking if they got any feedback on their self-assessment. It's kind of generic feedback, Adam. We would write, great. It's really good to understand, or to think about your own performance, because that's going to have a benefit for you down the line. You can write generic feedback. It doesn't have to be, because we have no idea what their answers are going to be, right? So you do have to write it a little bit generic, as in this previous example. So what kinds of things do you not like about yourself? What kinds of things are within your power to change? So use it as an opportunity to continue to have that more conversation. Somebody asked if the reflective approach, is it possible if you have a limited set of learners? Because there's a lot of variation in a learner's profile. Can we really create something reflective? I mean, I think you can. I think it's asking the right questions. It's knowing what questions to ask. When you have students respond to these things, do you then monitor it? Someone's asking, or is it just for them? You can do it both ways. If your system has a way of capturing text, like on this previous screen, if this example is just for you, this data is not saved anywhere. If your system can capture text and you want to, that can be useful, but it also, you just might want it to be a private experience. I did have one course where we did an open text input screen like this, and they didn't want it saved, and they didn't want people to think that it even might be saved. So instead, we just had a text and graphic screen and said, stop for a moment and think about this. We listed out the questions, and we didn't have them write it because it was sensitive enough information that they didn't want people to be worried that it was going to be saved. So the second bucket is really to get them feeling, get them thinking. In the previous one, we were having them do reflection, building in opportunities for self-reflection. And I think a big piece of interaction and interactivity is to get them feeling. We want it to be an emotional experience. I think the more emotional, the more it's going to stick. The learning is more memorable if you tie it back into, get their blood pumping a little bit, get them sweating a little bit, make it a little bit uncomfortable, help them feel the risks and the consequences of something. I'm reading through the Q&A right now. So someone asked, we've been kicking off courses with a survey question about how much they know about the topic, rather than in this module you will learn. Jenny, I think that's a great example of using self-reflection as a way to help focus their experience a little bit more. So you're asking them to reflect on what they know about this particular topic, and then that will focus them on what they need to pay attention to as they go through the program. I think that's a great example. Somebody else also asked, how can we be reflective in a communication course designed for everyone in the organization? Good challenge. It depends how big is your organization. Are there a lot of cultural issues? Is there a one-size-fits-all communication approach for everybody in the organization? If so, then I would think, yeah. I'd have to know more about that question, I think. And if you want to follow up with me in an email, maybe we can have a conversation about that afterwards. So let's get them feeling. So how do we make it a more human experience? I think one thing to do to make e-learning more engaging, more interactive, more human is to put a face to it. So this is a screenshot from a course we're actually just building right now, but it's a fairly dry course on a financial topic on UDAP, which is fairness in lending. And it could be, if you just threw the policies up on the screen, it could be really boring. But what we wanted to do is put a human face to it. So here you're doing a little bit of clicking, but you're going to see the stories of each of these people. So Susan, this was her story. She called to activate her card, and the person sold her something that she really didn't need, and it turned out it was an unfair practice. It was a little bit deceptive, and it was wrong. So by putting a human face to it, I think you're giving it a more emotional element, and that is interactive at that cognitive level because it's helping you connect with that content in a little bit more meaningful way. I'm going to show a sample here now where we want to put them into the story. And this is a program we did on data security, the comic book style approach, and the learner is going to be going through Superhero Academy. There's very gripping audio that goes with it, and I'm just going to play it for you without that audio because it won't come through. So imagine there's this deep comic book voice talking, and the threats that that are all around us all the time as we are going about our job. We're really kind of creating a blood-pumping moment. There's some intense music going behind them. There's this dark background with these graphics in front of it. And these two characters are inviting you to become superheroes and join in the quest to prevent data security mishaps from happening within the organization, because what matters is that everyone is involved. We all need to be involved. The time is now. The threat is real. Our mission is clear. So get ready. And it's very gripping in this very cinematic way. And then when we get into the course itself, now you are part of the Data Defense League. You're trying to earn your cape and type. And the e-learning, it's fairly, in our perspective, these are fairly simple text and graphic screens. The artwork, admittedly, is beautiful. They were actually done by a comic book company, but we pulled them into this program. And we have simple interactivity in here, but because we've engaged them in a different way because we pulled them into the story. And that's just a slightly different approach. It takes a little bit more creativity, perhaps, and here we did have the benefit of some really fantastic graphics. I know that not everyone's going to have access to something like that. But from a technical standpoint, this wasn't hard to build. These are just simple screen layouts and simple screen types. So that's where if you have good interactive or good graphics people, but simple technology, that can make a big difference. So put them into the story and make them feel the consequences of it. This program didn't have any branching exercises. Somebody was asking about branching earlier and feeling the consequences. You do still feel the consequences of things, but you don't have to do a lot of heavy programming. So we want to hook them in with a good story. I'm going to show you the story of Screaming Ruth. And Screaming Ruth is, I'm going to do this through the screenshots here, actually, sorry. Screaming Ruth is a manager, and she's kind of hard to work with, and she yells at people all the time. So as a manager, we hook them in with this story from the beginning, and she yells at this guy, Bobby, all the time. And what we do is we hook them into this story, and now we follow up with simple multiple choice questions after we've told this story. So it turns out that somebody blows the whistle on Ruth because her behavior was so inappropriate. And now we want them to dig a little bit deeper and find out why that behavior was inappropriate. It's not so much, this is a course actually on behavior in the workplace. It was a policy, teaching them about the policy, but we wanted to do it very contextually through stories because those are more memorable. And I think people interact with that differently than a list of, drag and drop the definition of this policy to that policy. So that's another option. Somebody in the comments has a good question. Do you feel that in a business environment, people sometimes feel the learning is too childish? I think that's a very good question. I think a lot of training is childish. I think if you go into a lot of classroom-based training programs where we have icebreaker activities and you're throwing a push ball around the classroom and you're sharing your name, that probably feels a little childish to busy grown-up adults, and yet we do that in classroom training all the time. So I think there's a bit of I think that's a very good question. If we do that in e-learning, it can be interesting. Now back to that, this example of the comic book. This is for an entertainment company, and they went with a comic book approach. And they got really good feedback on this e-learning. They did a bunch of surveys afterwards. But there were people who thought that it was too childish and that it wasn't appropriate. And they had to balance that view with all the people who really loved it. So you may get some people who push back on you. And I think certainly stakeholders might think that you're disrespecting their content, depending on how you treat it. But what you might want to do is follow that up with actual survey results. What do people prefer? You can sometimes build content two different ways and see what people like. I do a whole webinar on writing and tone in e-learning, and I think that's a big thing, is making it feel conversational and human. And, are you talking to me? You want to have a conversation with the learner. That's a big hallmark of the kind of e-learning that we try to create at Kineo. And sometimes you get pushback from it because people feel like you're not taking their content seriously enough. But I think it's just the opposite. You are making it more accessible, and ultimately it's going to be a more effective experience. So I hope that answered that question. Another thing you can do is ask provocative questions to gain interest. So this is a program, I'm going to pull this one up too. I think it's kind of cool. This is something we've just built in HTML5. Got all these reminders popping up. And you can resize the experience very, very easily. But we drop them into the content right from the get-go with questions. Get them thinking about the content in a hard and realistic way, you know. Actually, that's not right. It's kind of shocking. Sometimes you can present these shocking questions right up front. That gets people's attention. It's simply a multiple choice question, but it's interactive in that way that it hooks them in and gets them thinking in a different way. Can you make it uncomfortable? That's where you want to, you know, you're adding that emotional element and you're making them sweat under their skin a little bit. This is a program for the BBC on disability. And the BBC owns the rights to The Office. For those of us in the U.S., this is The Office in the U.K. I didn't realize Ricky Gervais was in it, right? That's who Ricky Gervais is. So they're showing a fire drill in this office. And these two guys are being really helpful to the woman who is in the wheelchair. And they start carrying her down the stairs. And they get halfway down the stairs because they know that you can't use the lift. And they're being so accommodating to her. And they get halfway down the stairs, and they're just too tired. And so they decide that they're going to just leave her there, and that it's just a drill, and it doesn't matter. And so it's left. The scene ends with this, you know, really poignant moment where she's staring at the camera, and that is the introduction to the course. Now, obviously, they have the rights to The Office, so they can do it. We don't all have the ability to include actual TV shows in our e-learning programs, and I'm not suggesting that you do. You've got to watch out for copyright rules. But even a story like that, just set up front, makes them uncomfortable and helps them see why this matters in a very human, realistic way. Then this is a simple drag and drop exercise where it says suffering from MS. Is that an acceptable thing to say or an unacceptable thing to say? Okay, Ellen is giving us all the background on The Office. Ricky Gervais actually created The Office. I did not know that. See, I only know the U.S. version of it. Very interesting. So make it uncomfortable. How can you do that in your e-learning? So who's been creating emotion in their e-learnings? If you have any approaches or stories you want to share in the Q&A, please let us know. Cheryl's asking if we have a good webinar on good navigation practices. We don't, but we can add that to our list. A webinar on good navigation. And Darlisa, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, back to the question about if it's childish of people and thinking if it's a waste of time. She says, I think people don't mind something childish as long as it doesn't feel like it's wasted time. And I think the point there is that if you are getting, you know, you can still learn something from something that maybe feels like a comic book. So if you got something out of it. Kelly says, we've tried to go emotional, but we've gotten shot down because stakeholders are afraid to go there. It's true. I was just doing a course on business continuity for a financial institution, and we had to pull out all the emotional stuff because people didn't want to be talking about the hurricane or terrorist accidents or terrorist incidents because it would make people too worried that it would happen to them. And I think it's a mistake to pull that out, but sometimes you do have to respond to your stakeholders, absolutely. Poignant stories of suffering to help build empathy, says Tristan. Very good point. I think empathy goes a long way. You want to show people, that's that human element. You want to show people why this matters and how human beings at the other ends are affected by it, and that goes a long way. Jenny is doing some courses on teen bullying, and she does a lot of this through scenarios. Absolutely give it that real human face to it. Sarah does a lot of policy courses, and you'd love to use all these tips, it sounds like. Yeah, I think these stories, Heidi has a good point. We use emotion for people to put themselves in the situation. So it's a way to share, you put yourself in their shoes. I think that's it's a very good strategy, and I think it is interactive. I think you can make a point for it. It's creating that cognitive connection. And let's remind our stakeholders that we don't think by clicking, we think by thinking. All right, our third bucket here is to get them acting, get them doing something right away. So these are fairly simple tips, but it's a little bit outside of what a lot of people think to do in e-learning. So this is a program I did for Paul Mitchell, and this is a Totura learning, it's a Moodle learning portal. It had a lot of DVD assets and other existing materials that they wanted people to watch, and all we did, well, not all we did, we created some little interactive exercises to it as well, but that first one that says take note is a Word document that you download, and you can enter your notes right into it, right online. You can print it out. It's sort of a low-tech solution, but I think very effective way to get people interacting with your content and helping consolidate things. When I was in, I went to trade school for a while. I became a massage therapist at one point in my career, and they taught us all about how to take notes, you know, and it was such an important part of consolidating our understanding. Think if you can add that into your e-learning in a very simple way. To get them into the action right away and assess what's going on, you recognize this slider bar. We reuse a lot of our components, but in this story, we were meeting Andrea, who was leading teams, and she was learning about the 4 stages of team development. And we were hearing about her scenario, and then you had to identify what stage this team was at using that slider bar. So we created a component that we've been able to reuse in multiple courses just by changing some of the text and maybe the graphics very easily. So you know, build something like that, a widget, and you can use it again. And then we have Andrea. Now you have to help Andrea make a selection and decide what the best response is. And this was an Articulate course, FYI. So nothing too fancy. This slider bar is a flash widget that we dropped in, but we just did this kind of a screen with hot graphics in PowerPoint. Jenny says, whoa, that's a Moodle. Yep, that's a Moodle. Moodle is a learning management system. We love Moodle. Here's another situation where we're making it relevant. This is another bit of content for Paul Mitchell. And they were teaching stylists, hairstylists, to go into other salons and teach them how to teach people, how to teach other stylists how to use their products. So you could have had a multiple choice quiz that was matching product knowledge, or you know, regurgitating and memorizing all the facts about particular products. But what they needed to be able to do, and you know, to make it relevant and contextual, was to answer questions that these stylists would have. So it's simply about how you write the questions in a different way. It's more scenario-based. Here, you know, here the person on the right is raising her hand because she's got a question. So how are you going to answer that question? So make it relevant. And make it relevant again. This is a course for M&S on serving people in a coffee shop line. And again, it's not about memorizing product facts. It's using them in context. So here you're going through the queue and you're answering different questions. You're filling different orders from all of these customers, and what's the best thing to say as you go through it. Multiple choice, but it's interactive in a very different way than a lot of multiple choice questions are. Drop them right into the task. I'm going to show you this example. So this is what we call a goal-based scenario. And this is essentially the first screen of this course, and you drop them right in. Here's your task brief. You're going to take on this role, the ISO's role in the isolation of equipment for scheduled maintenance. And you can read the brief. There's a little bit of setting up the challenge here, setting up the story. And now we're going to drop them right into it. What's the first thing that you need to do? What's your next step? And the cool thing here is if you do need to access the content, you know, usually this is where people start. That's off to the side, and now you can go off and you can read this content. But what really matters is we want them doing this stuff. We want them to apply it right away. Okay, so you're dropping them into that task right away. And here, this is an example of using a reflective exercise right in the middle. So we've answered the question, and now we have to ask them, how confident do you think you are about that question? Well, I don't know. Now, this doesn't go anywhere. It's not like it's tracked back to the database, but it gets them thinking, yeah, I think I'm pretty clear about that. And then we drop them into some content. So some different ways to set things up, which I think can be really powerful. All right, how about creating your own action plan? We've got, this is a course we built in Lectora, and it's teaching people how to use campaign materials. We have them fill out as they go through the course, an action plan. And just different fields, at different key moments in the course, you click on action plan, and at the end of it, you actually have your call to action. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to call these people. I'm going to share this material with them. I'm going to do this. I'm going to call that person. I'm going to talk to Wallace Smith about the digital mini catalog. So you're really building in that action right into the course. At the end of it, they have something tangible that they can take away with them. You may want to give them an activity to try offline. Again, it doesn't have to all happen on the course. And I think so much of e-learning these days, we've been talking more about creating campaigns rather than just single learning events. So add activities that they can take with them out into the future. Give them a call to action, something that they can do. So this was in one of our Creativity Essentials courses. It's a little exercise that you can take with you, and you can actually download the template, document the activity, and do it with your group later on down the line. So I think it's not about building something too complicated in the course itself. Here's another example. Have something have them jot something down so that they can create their own performance support tools. So this is just a screen that you click on, and they've got different tips. Next time I have a conversation, I'll clear my mind and actively listen to what the other person is saying. So almost having them develop their own job aid as they go forward based on the content that you're creating. So have them identify the mistakes that they might make. This is a course on writing, which people probably think you can't do very well in an e-learning course, but you can. Here we have a letter, and they have to pick out all the things that are wrong with this letter. And after they've submitted their response, you see all the things that were wrong with this. So helping them identify, and fairly simple to design and build something like that. It might not be what you thought of doing before. We can let them explore. Somebody talked about choices, and I'm going to show you a e-learning magazine. I'm sorry, all these things are up here. Just a magazine where you can let them browse and choose what content they want to go through. So this is more about having open learner control, more of an exploratory kind of a learning experience, browsable. There's still some interactivity in it and some stuff, but it's really letting them pick and choose what they want to do. So that's a very different kind of an experience. So are you doing a lot of this kind of application in your learning now? What kinds of stuff are people doing? And while you are typing into Q&A, I'm going to respond to some of the questions. Haley wonders, I've always veered away from asking reflective questions because I thought it's something people will skip right over. Any thoughts on this? I think sometimes people might skip right over it, but I think it's enough of a pause in the action that you get them thinking. Like me personally, if I'm reading a book and it says, hey, take a moment to do this and write this down, I usually don't. I'm too busy. I don't have enough time, right? But I stop and I think about it. So I'm still reflecting on it, and it is cogitating. It's working around in my brain. So, even if you're aware that people might not do it, I think that's okay because you're putting a pause in there. We will have this session available as a recording later on, and I will post slides of this up. So if people are asking if they'll be able to view these later, absolutely. And the last thing is about connecting with them. So the fourth type of interactivity, connecting with them, and that's human-to-human interactivity, and we forget about that all the time too. So how can you take this learning and create a human element to it? So in this program on communications, we built a workbook into the e-learning program, and it's a Word document. And the idea is that they're filling this out, and it's going to spawn. The output is they go and talk about this with their manager. So you're adding an interactive element into it by creating an offline conversation with somebody. Very, very, very radical, isn't it? In this example, the LMS triggered an email to people to the FX department after somebody completed this course. So over on the right it says, expect a call from the FX team shortly to follow up on how you're using the information. So somebody's actually going to call the person who finished this course, see if they have any questions, see how they're using it, anything you're stumbling over. That is truly interactive. You might want to have them upload assignments. This was a Moodle page where they actually had to upload a graphic organizer that they created. This is for teachers. And this is the kind of stuff people were uploading. You know, it's not assessed, there's not feedback, there was peer feedback, but it's more about getting people to do these assignments. And then finally, have people start a conversation with their manager. We kind of saw that with the worksheet. This is a survey, and this survey was sent to the manager. So after you finish the course, it says, what steps will you take going forward to improve your performance in all areas discussed in this module? And there's some accountability because you're going to have a conversation with your manager about those things that you wrote down. So truly making that a human element to it. And of course, if you're using social business tools in your organization, Yammer, Jive, Twitter, Facebook, you know, figure out ways to add that as an interactive element to your course to give it more human connection, more human interaction. So if anyone has any great ideas on how you've been providing or finding opportunities to add human-to-human contact in your course, it would be wonderful. So we don't have a lot of time yet. If anyone wants to share examples of their work, I think we're out of time for today, but what we could do is either create a follow-on webinar if people want to share their own examples of interaction. If you want to post things to Twitter on the Kineo webinar back channel, that would be great. So just to quickly review, we want to get them reflecting, we want to get them feeling, we want to get them acting and doing more. I should have had a fourth one on here, which is get them connecting with other human beings as a result of your e-learning program. So thinking about your own programs, we've got a couple of final polls here. What kinds of interactivity are you already using in your e-learning programs? Are you already getting them reflecting? Are you already thinking about that emotional piece? And I think, are you just having them click around and calling that interactivity? It might be that you're doing all of the above, in which case, I guess I have a block against including all of the above as an answer. I apologize. I'm learning by doing today. Oh, it's multiple select. Thank you, Steve. So a little bit of all of them. A lot of you are doing getting them acting and doing. That's excellent. So our next poll is, what do you want them to be doing more of? So what's kind of your key takeaway from today? What do you want to put more of in your e-learning programs? What are you going to do tomorrow or today, this afternoon? What are you going to add into that program that you're working on right now? More reflection. Excellent. I think you know, the bar is kind of low for how to add reflection into an e-learning course, but I think it really goes a long way. So I'm excited to see that that's there. And less clicking around. Great. All right. Any questions people have, please feel free to jot them into Q&A. I shared a lot of examples, and I know I probably talked really fast. We have just another minute. I wanted to share, we've got some upcoming webinars. Next week we're going to be doing a session on designing and delivering e-learning in a multi-device world. This is really all about responsive web design. It's more about the technology behind how do you build something that's going to run on an iPad versus an iPhone versus your computer. Do you want to? Is that even a good idea? The following Thursday, I'll be back doing a session called Parlez-vous Instructional Design. And I'm going to mangle the French there. But really, how can we create shared language within an organization about key instructional design terminology? And if you have specific things that you would like me to address in that session, please let me know. You can find out more about our events on the kineo.com/kineo-events page. The link is right there. Steve, if you can post that into chat for people, that might be helpful. They can go jump off and look at that. If you have questions, please interact with us. My email's there, hard to read, cami.bean@kineo.com. You can follow me on Twitter, and I am usually there.
If you do follow me, send me a message, and then I'll follow you back. And Steve, I just made up that that's your Twitter handle. I'm going to guess that it is.
It actually is.
Excellent. I'm brilliant. We have a Kineo Twitter account as well, @Kineo. Join us on LinkedIn and the eLearning Professionals group. And there's our other contact information. I hope that you guys all had a good time today. I'm going to see if there are any questions that came up. Steve, anything? We will have a recording of this available. I will post the slides up on SlideShare. I'm glad that you guys liked the examples, and I hope that you have a wonderful time building more reflective e-learning. And please let us know what you've discovered and what you want to try out. And if you have any questions, absolutely let me know. So thank you, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.